Hey, what's up, Facebook and all of our Sagebrush family that are watching along? Welcome to the weekly message discussion. We are hoping that this discussion will help you take the concepts from the weekend message and apply them to your lives in a meaningful way. My name is Eric, and I am with Pastor Andrew Poe, and we're here to walk through a couple of questions. Want to encourage you to participate along. If you're here live on Facebook, you can join in the chat too. But we are going to be talking about this week's message, which we're in the series called Relationship Playbook. Andrew, can you say hello and let everybody know what we've been talking about so far?
Hello everyone in the Facebook sphere. It's good to see you. Good to have you guys all online today with us. I love doing this weekly recap every Monday. Great. It's a great time for me just to process through the things that we learned. And this last weekend, we continued in the Relationship Role series, talking all about what a wife needs to be happy. And sometimes with a marriage series, we can overcomplicate things, but this has been so practical. I mean, it's just tangible things that you need to do to make your relationship a success. And sometimes I think we just overcomplicate it too much, Eric.
Yeah, for sure. I think there are definitely some good key takeaways that we took away here. And this is what I love too, is that, yeah, it is like a relationship series, and we are kind of honing in on marriage relationships, and this week specifically we're talking about kind of what a typical woman needs out of the relationship. But I think you could take a lot of these principles and apply them to every relationship you have. I mean, it makes you a better friend, it makes you a better, sibling or kid, parent, whatever, because a lot of these things that you need from a spouse are just good relationship tips in general. But what we're going to be doing here is going through the small group study questions. And for anyone who may not know, Andrew, can you share just a little bit about small groups and why they're so important?
Well, small groups are basically the bread and butter of our church. I mean, man, we wouldn't be the church that we are today without the many small group communities that are meeting all over Albuquerque, New Mexico, down in Belize, and now because of online groups, basically all over the nation. So we have seen God just do some incredible things. And this is our way of taking the message to heart. Because at times I hear a great message over the weekend, but after, the work week and my kids being crazy and everything else, I've forgotten what I learned by Wednesday. And so small groups are that opportunity to talk about the subject again and to take it in deeper. And man, I know for me, during this marriage study, my small group has been so good at reminding me of these truths and helping me to live it out. So we find not just are we going to study God's word, but they're going to hold you accountable for living out these truths.
And I think this weekend specifically, we kind of got a secular view, if you will, a non-Christian view of how important groups are, because it's a universal thing. It's not just about people who are churched or, your relationship with Jesus. It's important to be in community with one another. And there was a video that we played. It was the Husbands of Target. And I love that video. And so I'm actually going to put it in the comments here for you to check out, because I think you guys should all just watch it at some point if you haven't seen it already.
Have you spent some time in the Target parking lot?
Right, yeah, like the pocket jerky alone, I think
it's just worth it.
It's just worth the whole thing. And pay close attention to the footwear that the dads are wearing.
So
and
good.
Just look at that. Anyway, so as we're talking about these questions, you can answer along in the comments below. If you're watching this later, you can pause it. If you're with a group, you can pause as well and discuss as we ask, but we're going to interact with you to get some of these questions and really just try to figure out how to apply these principles in a meaningful way. We usually start, though, with an icebreaker. So here's the icebreaker question to start with. Who in your life has demonstrated Christ-like sacrificial love to you, and how do they do this?
Yeah, for me, Eric, that's an easy question, because that would be my dad. And I've shared a little bit about my dad with the church for the past few times that I've spoken. But my dad was an amazing man of God. And 11 years ago in June, my dad died of cancer. And so but my dad has been that example of Christ-like love. And my dad kind of had this evil genius plan for me when I was growing up, because he always gave me the most rundown cars, Eric. So he bought me like the biggest jalopies. So I had an Oldsmobile Toronado. I had a Chevy Blazer that like never ran well.
Right.
And then I had a 1972 Chevy Suburban. It had 3 doors.
That's great.
It was like 4 miles to the gallon. It was awful. But no, all these cars like broke down all the time.
Sure.
And my dad loved it, because my dad loved working on cars. So I'd be on the side of the road and my dad would always come and rescue me. Like no matter where I was at, whether I was on the freeway or I was in some obscure town, I would call my dad on my cell phone or on a call box or a pay phone back then. And my dad would show up. and he'd fix my car or he'd get it running, and he always rescued me. And I think that mirrors what Jesus Christ did for each and every one of us.
Yeah.
That he saw us and he loved us in spite of the fact that we don't have it all together. And he stepped into our world to rescue us. And so that kind of sacrificial love I saw in my dad, and man, I'll always think of that when I think about Christ-like behavior.
Yeah, I think looking in the comments here, a lot of people agree. Their parents, grandparents, grandmothers, both of them. I think that's. I hope that it's going to be a lot easier when I'm a grandfather to be much more sacrificial and Christ-like. Because I can tell you that as a dad, I'm not always sacrificial and Christ-like. So maybe there's that one generation degree of separation that you need.
Especially when you can give them back.
Right, exactly.
It'll be very nice.
But I agree with you. I mean, my parents sacrificed so much stuff for me. And I would say this too, is that even in the times, like just like you talked about your dad not giving you a brand new car, giving you the jalopy and my parents didn't always just give me everything. Sometimes they modeled tough love, Christ-like tough love, to make sure that, I would be prepared to be a functional adult, I guess, as much as I could be.
Yeah, you're working on it.
Yes,
so you're doing
exactly.
a good job.
So we're going to hop into another question, but before we do that, this series is all about relationships, and generally, speaking, relationships all revolve around some sort of love. And so Pastor Todd talked about it a little bit this weekend, but Andrew, can you give us a brief overview of the types of love we see in the Bible?
Yes, Eric, thank you for stretching my Greek knowledge. Took lots of years of Greek in seminary and Bible college.
We're going to be judging pronunciation, by the way.
My pronunciation
and you got to spell it too.
Terrible. But the first type of love that we see in the Bible is the Greek word phileo. It's not to be confused with filet fish, Eric, but phileo means brotherly love. That's actually where we get Philadelphia, is this idea of brotherly love. And this is type of love that a friend has for one another. Then we find the Eros love. And Eros is like the, I would say, sexual love, as well as exotic love, romantic love, all those different things that a husband should have for his wife. And then the last one is agape love. And that's unconditional love. And that's the type of love that God has for each one of us. That unconditional love, the love that loves no matter what, in spite of the fact that we may not have it together.
Yeah. So we're going to, thank you for that, because we're going to actually talk about this throughout our discussion today. For the next question, you could pause it if you're with a group, or if you're going to pause it and journal, or if you need to pause to think about your thoughts and write them in the comments here. Next question is, in your own words, what does it mean to truly love someone? Andrew, what do you think?
I think to really love someone is, love is a deep, abiding affection that you have for someone else that stirs change. So it has to be something more than just a feeling. It's got to have an effect on your life. And so, when I fell in love with my wife, Laura, it started to change me. When she came walking into church and, I was attracted to her, I started changing my behavior. I started to shower, which is positive, and wear deodorant and, to try to look nice, and everything else. So some things about me began to change, and I laugh about that, but that's...
For the better.
For the better. Yeah. People started to like me, and I had many more conversations. It was much better.
So she's a saint.
She's a saint. Okay, there's no doubt about it.
Yeah, thank you.
But love really does change you. And I love what it says in 1 John chapter 3, verse 18, because it says, let us not love with just mere words, but let us love with actions and truth. And I believe that's what love is. It has to come out in our behavior. It has to change us. It has to do more than just be a light and fluffy feeling. It's got to have some effect on your life that makes you a different person.
Right. Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I think that, it really models that first question about sacrificial love, right? Because you're sacrificing something. You're changing something about you. You're giving up a little bit about you and your routine and your preferences for someone else. And I think that applies not only in the marriage relationship, but for those of you that have like a best friend or even just a thriving friend relationship or siblings or anything else like that that's like non-romantic. If you think about it, if you're not sacrificing for your friend, that relationship isn't going to be strong. If you're not sacrificing for others that you consider friends, I mean, it's just not going to go as far, because you've all, I mean, I'm sure we've all been in relationships where you've been selfish. That doesn't necessarily work out. And I love Todd's analogy he brought up during the message, where he talked about that football game analogy, where it's like, okay, husbands, think about this. You're watching sports, and you think it was like football game. Your team is down by 2, less than a minute left. They're getting ready to kick the field goal to win the game, and your wife says, hey, can can you turn that off and talk to me? Right? There's that decision of like, am I going to sacrifice things? And so I think that's a good thing to think through is like, what sort of thing would I give up for other people?
Correct.
And what wouldn't I?
This is also why I have a DVR.
Right? Yes, exactly.
Just put it on pause, bro.
Yeah, exactly.
It's great.
So we're going to be in the book of Ephesians, specifically chapter 5. Okay, great. We're going to be in Ephesians chapter 5. This is a pretty popular chapter for conversation when it comes to relationships. So let's navigate this little minefield as we do.
Let's do, Eric. Okay. Let's do it.
So go ahead and mark that down if you're going to read it later. You can follow along. Chapter 5, verse 25 through 27 here. It says, "For husbands, this means love your wives just as Christ loved the church. He gave up his life for her, to make her holy and clean, washed by the cleansing of God's word. He did this to present her to himself as a glorious church without a spot or wrinkle or any other blemish. Instead, she will be holy and without fault." Now, the question is, as we read that, you might need to read it again or go over it. According to these verses, what is the standard for the love husbands are to show their wives? And do you find the standard of love difficult or easy to model?
Yeah, this one's really clear. It's for husbands to love their wife as Christ loved the church. And when you think about how Jesus Christ loved the church, man, he went all the way. I mean, he gave up his own life. He died a horrific death on the cross. And I know for me, that is hard.
Yeah.
I mean, to lay down your own expectations, because oftentimes, Eric, I can be a pretty selfish person. For instance, my wife loves the St. James Tea Room.
Okay.
I don't know if you've heard of this place before.
No.
But it's this tea room in Albuquerque, and you go to the tea room, and it takes 2 hours. 2 hours of sitting and drinking tea and eating crumpets. And then having stimulating conversation. This is not my idea of a fun time. But I decided, you know what, I'm going to sacrifice for myself. I'm going to go with my wife. And man, just laying that down and going with my wife, it was an amazing experience.
So this is your version of the Dixieland Stampede or whatever, the Dolly Parton experience that Todd had?
Yeah, something like that. But man, I had a great time just, sitting with my wife and hearing her. I even enjoyed the crumpets and the little biscuits and everything else. But man, it was a great time for me to do something that my wife likes to do. And we have to do that as men. We have to enter into our wife's world. We have to kind of come into what they want to do and what they like and sacrifice ourselves. Again, just like Jesus sacrificed himself for us.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. You know, in relationships, not only are you into this sacrificing thing, but like how excited are you when the person that you want to be in a relationship with or that you are in a relationship with is having a good time?
Yeah.
Right. So whether that's your spouse, obviously we're talking specifically about a spouse relationship, but maybe if you're not married, you're thinking about like, how excited am I when my friend is having fun? You know, even if it's not something that's my idea of fun. But specifically to the husband question, if I look through these, I mean, literally 2 verses, anyone out there, and guys, just look right here, anyone out there who thinks that they are doing enough or that they have got it, or they've got the husband thing or the love thing mastered, or, you know, your hashtag relationship goals or trophy husband, just read it again and tell me that you think that you've got this one nailed, because I could go through this a couple of times and go, I don't think so.
Not quite like Christ loved the church.
He gave up his life for her.
Yes.
His life.
He was all in.
All in, yeah, exactly.
And I like what Todd said. You got to fight for the fact that it's not about me, but it's now about we.
Right.
Instead of pursuing your own goals, your own objectives, your own agenda, you got to be about we. You've got to sacrifice yourself just like Christ gave everything for us.
And we got a couple of great comments here too. You know, Lisa hopped in and said, I learned to love football because my husband enjoys it. So, I mean, it even goes the other way too on things like that as well. And I think that's a great point, you know, about God is just Christ loving us so much and trying to figure out how can we get to that point where we're giving up our life. And I think that's almost like an aspirational goal too, because like obviously God isn't saying like, well, just sacrifice your life right now physically for your wife, but it is maybe something that's continual and progressive as you go on. Just keep going and going and going as much as you can. Yeah. So as we read on, we're going to be in verse 28. It says, in the same way, husbands ought to love their wives as they love their own bodies. For a man who loves his wife actually shows love for himself. No one hates his own body, but feeds and cares for it, just as Christ cares for the church. And we are members of his body. As scriptures say, a man leaves his father and mother and is joined with his wife, and the two are united into one. This is a great mystery, but it is an illustration of the way Christ and the church are one. So again, I say each man must love his wife as he loves himself, and the wife must respect her husband. So the question here is, what stands out to you in these verses and why? So this is a great idea. If you're on your own, you could press pause, get your Bible out or the Bible app, highlight some things, and really just journal and note some things. You know, just list out all the stuff that stands out to you. You can also enter in the comments too. But Andrew, specifically, as you were going through this, what was standing out to you?
Yeah, I think in this whole passage of Scripture, Paul is going after the jugular here. Because, man, he knows the Ephesians. And he knows exactly what they struggle with. And actually, I think it was 15 years ago, I had the opportunity to go to the city of Ephesus in Turkey. And you could see like the ancient city, you can walk around. And back then during this time, there were over 500,000 people who lived in the city of Ephesus.
Wow.
It would have been one of the biggest cities in the whole entire world. And during that time, the guys were actually pretty self-centered.
Okay.
During that time...
Not much has changed.
Not much has changed.
Okay.
But during that time, though, the guys were like way into their bodies. And way into their physique. I mean, they had gymnasiums there where they could train, so they could get all buff and muscular. They used to have spas there, and usually we think of a spa as kind of a girly thing, like where the girls go. But back then, it was actually where guys went.
Wow.
So they went to take care of their body and everything else. So they put so much time and effort into their body so they could look like all the statues that they saw all along the road and everything else. And so during that time where self-image was such a big deal, Paul's saying you need to love your wife as you love your own body. In the same way that you take so much care to make sure that you're pampered, to make sure that you're working out, to make sure that you're disciplined and all those things, you need to have that same love for your own body that you have for your wife. Which is huge for these guys because they were so self-centered. All they thought about was their own body. And now he's saying, no, there's something different. Because your wife isn't just a personal possession. Because let's remember, back during that time, your wife was not just another member of society. She was your possession in a lot of different circumstances. And so now he's saying something different. Now, she's something to be treasured. She's something to be cherished. And that's something to learn for all of us. Instead of just taking marriage lightly or your spouse lightly, treasure them. Take care of them. You know, pamper them. You know, cherish them in all that you do. Right.
And I really like that insight there about, you know, think about the time and the day. Like, this isn't a biblical thing, but outside the environment they were in, women were, like you said, property. And so the Bible speaking to this, and Paul specifically having words to say, hey guys, this is not the way that we're going to treat our wives.
Yes, exactly.
Right? It just in the same way as like the church is not our property, right? It's an independent thing that lives and thrives. And I think, you know, when you're talking about the guys that are going into and really into their own body and physique, well, what does that mean for guys like you and I? I mean, obviously, we're really...
I mean, obviously, I'm rich.
Stuff
you know,
like that.
Come on.
Spend all kinds of time.
Spartan warrior here.
But for our day and age, or for people that maybe aren't in that same context, and you tell me if I'm going off into something that's not correct, but I would say maybe look at your calendar. How much time are you spending with your wife? Look at your finances. Because I know I love buying things on Amazon. I love buying things for me. I love all that. But if I'm not purchasing things that are like, hey, what is this going to be where I'm actually spending money on things we're going to do together? If I look at my own personal calendar and I'm like, hey, I'm spending so much time at work, and then when I get home from work, now it's me time. Because I don't know about you, but when I'm done with a full day, I just kind of want to veg.
Exactly.
And my wife's a teacher, so this summer she's been, you know, she's home with the kids all day, and it's like, hey, at some point, am I giving up my own to like love her and give her some time and give my kids some time as well?
Yeah, I'm right there with you, Eric. I know during this time where there's been the stay-at-home order, I've noticed that, man, at the very beginning, we did a great job of connecting because we only had each other. And so we'd be excited to get together and, you know, have family dinners and everything like that. But now, you know, that we are 13 or 14, I think, I don't even know.
17.
It feels like 17 years. But we've been, you know, in this for about 14 weeks now. What I've found is that we've all found our own personal rhythm of isolation, where we kind of go and we sit on our own or sit on our electronics or something else. And we're missing that idea of just really connecting with one another. And I think that that's so important, that we need to fight to be connected. And that's what Paul was writing there, because he's talking about becoming one.
Yeah.
And that oneness is so important for a marriage, because we should fight for that oneness, because the world and the evil one wants to pull you away. And so we've got to fight for this. We got to say, you know what, man, I am going to make the most of this relationship, and man, I'm going to pour into my wife and to my children and everything else.
Yeah, and I think we got some interesting comments here, you know, especially when we talk about, you know, there's a question here, how do you make your husband happy? Or that's going to be covered next week for sure. But also some questions online, like, as a woman, like, we're two dudes here, but you know, Todd addressed a typical stereotypical type of woman, right? More emotional needs, more needs like that. But that doesn't cover every woman in a relationship. And I think we understand that. But what I love about this scripture is it talks about loving loving your wife as yourself, right? And when you show that love for your wife, you're actually showing love for yourself. And so just in the same way as I wouldn't pick out something for me that I don't like, or I wouldn't go out and spend time on stuff that I don't like, or like I wouldn't say, hey, typically guys like this, so I should like this, right?
Exactly.
I would take time and go, who am I? What do I personally like? Take that time with your wife. So husbands, maybe your wife doesn't apply to some of the examples that Todd has used or the stereotypical look. You need to be someone that would study her in the same way as you would study and really try to figure out your own tastes.
Correct. Almost
like going to a restaurant, right? You're like, what do I like to eat? Not what's popular or somebody else. I would never sit there and go, hey, Andrew, well,
I think you should have this.
What's the worst thing on the menu and order that for me, right? It's so in the same way, try to pick out something that your spouse, and figure out how are you going to spend time. Does she need more time?
Correct.
Does she need more, I'm trying to think of all the 5 love languages off the top of my head, more time? Does she need more affection? Does she need more words of affirmation, more gifts? Those sorts of things. Acts of service, got them all.
Got them.
Yes.
Crushed
it. So figure that out in the same way as you would want her to care about you in that way.
Yeah, and I loved that we talked about that scripture from Philippians chapter 2, verse 3, which says, each of you should look not only to your own interests, but also to the interests of others.
Sure.
And that's so profound.
Right.
Because once you get outside of yourself, and once you start saying, hey, who is this person? Let me study them. Let me try to figure out how they tick and what makes their heart warm, or what makes them happy. For my wife, she hates to cook.
Okay.
Sorry to out you if you're online, honey. I apologize right now. But my wife, she doesn't like cooking.
Sure.
And so what we've done over the past few weeks is I sit down with her and I actually write out the menu for the whole week.
Yeah.
And she loves it.
Yeah.
Because she's like, man, I don't have to think about this.
Yeah.
And I don't have to think about what we're going to have for dinner or anything like that. It's all just laid out for her. And man, that's just something that she loves. But that's from learning to study her and what her needs are, and learn how I can cherish her and care for her.
Yeah, and that's a great example of like a stereotypical gender role.
Correct.
That you guys had to work out.
We had to work out.
It doesn't, and I'm sure there's other conversations that come in there, because there's probably, some sort of, shame, or I don't feel, because, this is typical how we're supposed to, but it doesn't matter.
Correct.
Right? Because she's your wife.
She's my wife.
And that's why it's so important to have this unity, which leads us to our next question. Why is unity in our marriages and in all of our relationships with followers of Jesus so important?
Yeah. I've said this before here. I think in a world that's so divided, I think that the world needs to see us as married couples as unified. And they need to see that we are pursuing this oneness above everything else, that we're on the same page.
Yep.
And you don't see this often, because you see couples who are in conflict all the time. You see couples who fight all the time and everything else. Because I believe a lot of times they haven't put Christ at the very center of their relationship.
Right.
And so we need to first focus on God and allow that oneness to come as we're alone, kind of connecting with God, and then we're leaning into our relationship with one another. We're following that example of loving one another as Christ loved the church, and he gave up everything. And so I think that unity is both important for a husband and wife, but it's even more important for your kids. It's even more important for your kids to see a mom and a dad who are on the same page. Not a mom and dad who are in conflict all the time, or not seeing a mom and dad who are at odds at every time. Sure. My kids need to see my kids need to see my wife and I loving each other and caring for each other. And so we've made it our personal point to gross them out. Like, we kiss in front of them.
Oh, okay. That type of, okay.
Yeah, like that, because my kids don't like kissing. They turn away from every movie that has kissing.
It wasn't like, hey, we're going to dissect a frog in front of you.
No.
Right.
But we want to make sure, though, that we are loving and we're affectionate with one another in front of them.
Yeah.
Because we want them to see that picture of a couple that's unified.
Yes.
And my kids will see through this faster than anybody else as a pastor.
Yeah.
Because, man, I could put on the show outside and I could, be nice in the lobby at church and up on stage. But if I'm not living out these Christian principles, I know that they're going to see right through Dad.
Right.
And so you've got to pursue this oneness, because I believe it's an example both to all the world of how we should be, but also to our own kids.
Well, and speaking of unity, Laura Poe did hop in here and said, it's true, Andrew is a better cook. You can see it right there. So you guys are on the same page on that.
We're on the same page. We've talked about this.
But I think seriously, the conversation is great, because when you talk about your kids, even if you do have arguments, making sure that they know that you can handle it in a healthy way and you're unified leaving. And I think, out of all the times that I've, counseled couples or talked to, especially guys who are having marital problems, or the dreaded conversation when the wife says, hey, can you talk to my husband?
Yeah.
And you're just like, oh man, that's the worst type of setup.
It's so hard.
But you end up having those conversations. What I find more often than not is that when a marriage isn't going well, it's because there is some lack of that unity, right? Where maybe, like we talked about before, maybe there is a different priority when it comes to time. He wants to spend his time doing this.
Yep.
She wants to spend her time doing this. Or money. He wants to spend the money this way. She wants to spend it this way. Or raising kids, like you said. You start moving away from each other and you're not unified. Even if you disagree, you can still be unified in that end goal for what you want. And I think that's a great example for friendships as well. So even if it's not a romantic relationship. So again, for those of you that aren't married and you're like still tuning in here, that's something to think about. Is like, when we had a couple of our, I think it was our student pastor here, a couple other people talking about like friendships are so important. Like, group life is so important because you are that sum of your 3 to 5 closest friends.
Oh yeah, that's the truth.
So thinking through who is it in your life that you are allowing to speak into your life as a friend, and are you unified with the same kind of goals and values moving forward? You may disagree on where you want to eat or how you want to hang out, but are you moving in that same direction?
Yeah, and if you're dating in that place and you're not on the same page with this, man, that's a sign to run away. Because, or to just at least have an honest conversation with what's really going on. Because you want to be in a relationship where the guy respects you for you ladies. And for you men, you want to be in a relationship where you can love this woman like Christ loved the church.
Exactly. And so we're going to close here with a question. If you're married, here's what you need to, this is kind of like a self-evaluation. Are you demonstrating this self-sacrificial Christ-like love to those around you? And why or why not? If not, here's what you need to do is work on a step you could take this week to start demonstrating this kind of Ephesians 5 love for your spouse. Now, for those of you that are single, are you demonstrating this type of love to your loved ones and friends? Why or why not? And if not, what steps can you take this week to start demonstrating this type of love to your loved ones and friends? Andrew, do you have any ideas or any steps that they could take along that route?
Yeah, I would say an honest evaluation of how you're spending your time and where your priorities are so important for that. Because if you're gearing your life all around yourself and you're not making time for your spouse or that person who's in your relationship, this could even be a good friendship. If all your life revolves around yourself, then you're setting yourself up for failure.
Exactly.
So this week I would say for any of the married couples, take time to get out of your own skin. Do something that your wife loves to do, or spend a time taking them out on a date somewhere. Do something special without the kids. Just make the time to get into the other person's space and love them.
Those are some great tips for all of you. If there's anything that you need, our pastoral team is in the comments here. If you have any prayer requests, you could feel free to enter those in as well. And if you like what's going on here and you say, you know what, this is actually beneficial. I love kind of living out some of these things throughout the week and applying them in my life, we want you to get involved in a group. And so if you would like to get involved in a small group, whether it's online or sign up for one that we can meet in person when we can meet in person, or social distance or whatever, just raise your hand, comment in here, and someone will get connected with you to sign you up for a small group. And then make sure to tune in. This is very important. Tune in tomorrow for our Q&A with Pastor Todd, because I hear there is going to be an announcement that you're not going to want to miss.
It's going to be good.
Other than that, Andrew, do you have anything else for the people at home?
No, I think we're good, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in today. We pray for you guys, and we're constantly praying that God will hold you together, keep us unified, and keep us focused on living for Christ and sharing his love with others.
See you tomorrow at noon.